Bonjour. My name is Mireille Girard. I'm the UNHCR representative in Lebanon. The situation of refugees in Lebanon at the moment is reaching unprecedented level of vulnerability and anxiety. Refugees we are now in the 9th year after the displacement from Syria, and they have depleted all their savings. They were struggling already to survive after nine years in exile. But now what is happening is that they were hit very hardly by the economic crisis that started in Lebanon already in the middle of last year. Plus now the COVID, as from March, has created more economic difficulties. And now in Beirut, those refugees living in Beirut are affected and traumatized by the blast. So the situation is really one of crisis for all the refugees. They do not know what the future will hold for them. They don't see the situation improving anytime soon in the country. And we as humanitarians are doing everything we can to keep their head above the water so they can survive in dignity as much as possible while they are in exile until they can go back to their country.
اسمي ميراي جيرار، أنا ممثلة المفوضية بلبنان. وضع اللاجئين بعد مرور أكثر من 9 سنين، اللاجئين السوريين بعد مرور أكثر من 9 سنين من وجودهم بلبنان وضعهم صعب جدا. وصلوا لمستوى من الفقر ما كانوا واصلين له قبل. والأزمة الاقتصادية تفاقمت مع كمان وصول أزمة الكوفيد 19 أو الكورونا فيروس. ووضع اللاجئين إنه حاليا يعني كل اللاجئين هن عم بيواجهوا هالأزمة، وما عم بيقدروا يشوفوا أي تحسين بوضعهم بالأشهر المقبلة. نحن كمنظمات إنسانية عم نحاول قدر المستطاع إنه نساعدهم ليضلوا يقدروا يعيشوا بكرامة بهالفترة اللي هن بعدهم فيها بلبنان. I think I tried to summarize، بس إذا في شيء بدي أرجع أسمع وأرجع أقول لك بعدين. أوكي؟
حضرتك بتسجلي طيب؟
عم سجل. بدك نرجع نعملها بعدين، ما نضيع وقت.
ما فيش. لا، لأنه أنا من إجابتها ممكن أخد حاجة، يعني ممكن أفهم شيء أبقى عايزة أنا أسأل عنه تاني. طيب أنا كنت عايزة أسأل على العدد العام للاجئين السوريين هنا في لبنان، العدد الإجمالي، وبيتوزعوا إزاي؟ يعني هم على كام بغير مش بس بقاع ولا غزة، توزيعتهم إزاي في لبنان، في أنهي مناطق، وكام عددهم الإجمالي؟
So, what is the total number of Syrian refugees in Lebanon, and how are they distributed in the country, in camps or not in camps, and not just in the Bekaa but other areas?
There are currently about 880,000 refugees in Lebanon, registered with UNHCR, but we estimate in total about 1.3 million refugees, including those who are not registered officially, because we were asked by the government to stop registration in 2015. So those who arrive later are not registered, yet they are in the country. People are scattered all over the country. Refugees are all over the country. 80% of them are living, like in Egypt, in urban setting. They are living in apartments, basement, garage, unfinished building. And 20% are living in so-called camps, but they are not really formal camps. They are spontaneous camps that people organize by themselves, renting the land from a landlord and putting a few tents on it. So this is the situation in Lebanon.
20% من اللاجئين.
Yeah, there are about 1,500 settlements that are more than 10 tents. If we have smaller settlements, we don't count them, but it's about 3,000 of them that are smaller. The big concentration area for the tents is the Bekaa, the north, and there are some settlements in the south and some in Mount Lebanon and Beirut. But mainly in the south and Mount Lebanon and Beirut, people are living in urban setting. And Akkar, the region on the north that is bordering Syria, is also an area where you have a lot of informal settlement. Well, this was a government decision at the time. We advocated for the continuation of registration because it's important for people protection, for planning, to have accurate data on the refugees. It was at the time where the border between Lebanon and Syria was closed, where visas were established for people moving in both directions, and a number of restrictions were established. So at that point, registration was interrupted. Humanitarian assistance is based on needs and not on legal status, etc. So if we have an old lady that requires hospitalization, for us we do not discriminate, and we look at survival needs of people. Alors, the assistance to refugees, to the close to 1 million refugees in this country. Let's not forget that apart from Syrian, we have other group of refugees from Iraq, from Sudan, and other countries. The assistance is basically following three approaches. The first one is the basic services, making sure people have access to education, healthcare, and to do that we subsidize the public services so that they do not constitute a cost for the state, for the host country, Lebanon, which is already a state that is struggling to cover its own needs. The second approach is protection, ensuring that people have access to basic documents, civil documents, birth registration for their children, death certificate, legal residency so they're not arrested when they move through checkpoints, etc. That is a basic protection. And the third one is empowerment of people, making sure refugees have access to information, that they are in control of their own life. We have a cash safety net program where we give cash to people. So for the most vulnerable, unfortunately, we can't cover everyone, but a certain percentage, about 30% of the population, are receiving cash to survive, where they can buy food or clothes or medicine, and they choose what is most important for them. So we try to enhance dignity that way by giving people the means to survive. We are advocating for this. We're trying everything we can to make sure the legal situation of refugees is ascertained, is improved. Over the years, a number of simplifications have been introduced to enable more people to get access to legal residency, including simplification for birth registration. But there are still a number of, let's say, limitations to the issuance of this identity document, including the date of arrival. And we are discussing with the authorities, and at the level of the Brussels conference that took place on the Syria crisis, there were a number of engagement and to encourage Lebanon to simplify and to broaden the criteria to give some legal safety to people while they are in exile. That doesn't mean long-term settlement, but just during the time they are in exile, that they have dignity. There have been a number of engagements. As I said, some simplification were introduced over the years through the different conferences, and also a lot of discussion that took place here in the country. But we're not yet where we would be in a situation where everyone can have access to this procedure. For the moment, it's only a certain category of people that are eligible to this fee waiver or simplification, and some others are still do not have access to this procedure. So we continue this dialogue. It's very important. Well, Lebanon has been one of the most generous country hosting refugees, because this is, compared to the population of Lebanon, this is the largest refugee concentration in the whole world. It's a population of 1 million, more or less, for a population of 4 million. Nowhere in the world do you find this large number compared to the population. You have countries like Turkey that have a higher number of refugees, but the population is much bigger, and the economy is also bigger. So in contribution that Lebanon has done, I think we can certainly acknowledge the gesture that Lebanon did to support people. And this is a country that is struggling itself. This is a country that is affected by an economic crisis already, as we discussed earlier. And having to host more population, it's another challenge. And now we have the COVID, and now we have the blast response. So in this context, for us as humanitarian, our challenges are every day higher. It's like every day we're given another challenge, and the needs of people are increasing over the years, and the challenge are increasing over the years, so the needs are always much higher than what we can do with humanitarian assistance. I think we have to distinguish what is the impact of the Syria war and the impact of the presence of refugees. I'll give you an example. The war in Syria has created a very big economic impact on Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, because, for example, the exports have stopped. They were going through the Gulf, through Syria. The tourism has dropped. These are big income for the country. So this has really impacted the gross national product. The presence of refugees is a consequence of the same crisis, but it's not the cause of all the problems that the war has created. The presence of refugees is creating a strain for the state, for the public services, for example. More children in school, more sick people going to hospital. This is why the humanitarian assistance from the beginning has been through the public services to try to reinforce the public services, subsidize them, so this would not constitute a cost for the state, and perhaps to help the public services to come out of this crisis stronger than they were even before the crisis. The presence of refugees is also creating, for example, more solid waste. That's why a lot of our programs are for garbage collection, sorting, environment protection, etc. But the refugee presence has also some positive component. For example, refugees are consuming. They're consuming goods at a time when the exportation have dropped. So the World Bank has proven that while the Syria crisis has reduced the GDP of Lebanon, Jordan, etc., the presence of refugees have reduced that decrease by 1% because of consumption, because they created consumption, so it supported a bit the economy. So you see, there are some pressure of the presence of refugees, but there are also some positive. And it's really important to capitalize on the positive to help these countries in the region recover from this economic crisis. On the camps, I must say that UNHCR is not opposed to the idea that it's better to live outside camps than in camps. So we are not necessarily advocating for camps, because a formal camp, can be good in that we can provide, good services. At the same time, it's not a very human way of living. It's better for people to live in a village or in a city rather than living separately from the rest of the population in the camp. It's not very dignified. So UNHCR for the past 20 years is moving away from camp if possible. If it's allowed for people to settle where they want, it's better, we think. So we are not opposed to that policy of no camps of the government, to be clear, and we've discussed that. The problem in those camps is that they are informal, so the standards are not good. They're not organized camps, so the standards of hygiene are not good, and we try our best, but they're not organized camps. So the services there are not to the level we would like. At the moment, the law of Lebanon is restricting access to a number of sectors for foreigners. It's for all foreigners, it's not only for the refugees, but actually there is an exception for the Syrian refugees that can work in construction and agriculture and also environment services, which are these three sectors where actually other foreigners are not allowed to work. So in a way, it is a bit more flexible for the refugees, but indeed they are not allowed to work in other sectors. So our advocacy is to try to make sure that people can survive, but already it's important to note that more than 80% of the refugee population actually work in those sectors, agriculture, construction. A lot of them come from a background of daily labor. They're agricultural workers or they're construction workers. They were doing that in their country before coming. So naturally, they're looking for a job in those sectors. It's difficult to predict the future of what's the situation inside Syria, but certainly what our surveys among refugees have shown to us very clearly over the past 3 years is that more than 80% of the refugees wish to go back home. This is their country and this is where they see their future. Now the question is when. When will they take the decision to go back? It depends on their own personal situation. Some have their house destroyed, some still have families, some others don't have, some have been very traumatized, some less. So it's an individual decision for us. It's not for UNHCR to say to people when they should return or should not return. we respect people's decisions. Some people have already returned. Last year we had about 24,000 refugees going back from Lebanon and about 70,000 from the whole region to Syria. We were thinking that this year we may have more, but because of COVID and the closure of the border, actually the numbers dropped. But we are observing, and the numbers may increase over the years, particularly that the economic situation is very difficult for refugees. So we are watching what their own intentions are, and we will be there for refugees whatever their decision. If people decide to return, we will be there for them inside Syria. Before they return, we will help them prepare. And for those who are staying here, we will continue humanitarian assistance to make sure they can live in dignity until they go back home. We just hope that the situation will become more and more conducive to return, and that there will be more people return, because it's what people wish. And the idea is, to enable people to go back to their country if this is their wish. Of course, social distancing is a difficulty in camps, so we were very worried that the risk of corona spread is bigger in camps or where people live in concentration area, like a building where many families live. So we've been focusing on these areas for distribution of hygiene material, information. All refugees in Lebanon receive the information, etc. Fortunately, we have had very limited number of cases, only a few in the concentration areas, and we have had so far more than 200 refugee cases testing positive since March, but the large majority of them, more than 90%, were in urban setting, where population are mixed and there were COVID among different people, including some refugees that were living there. But we have had very few in camps, and I think it is because of a lot of information that was distributed, hygiene material. So fortunately we have contained that, but we are not at the end of the corona crisis, and we have to remain very vigilant and very careful. Thank you.